Welcome. This one will not begin with a bang, but give it time. History has a way of waking up when you least expect it, and for the aliens of the Dravaki Dominion, the wake-up call came in the form of one human, whose talent was not in the ways of power displays or fleets of starships, but in the strangely underestimated practice of diplomacy, though it must be noted that the word diplomacy, when applied to humans, requires a far broader definition than most species would dare tolerate. For while others understood it as the polite exchange of carefully measured words, humans managed to turn it, into a performance art somewhere between negotiation theater and subtle psychological warfare with snacks, and the Dravaki did not know this, at least not at first, because in their glorious chronicles, the Dravaki had never encountered a species quite so bold to make their chaos an asset. Yet, here they so-called Yagrola were demanding war with Earth, pounding their clawed fists and their ceremonial staffs upon the crystalline floors of their imperial chamber, chanting and screeching about vengeance for perceived slights, insults, and territorial disputes that mostly existed in their heads, since humans had not really noticed them until the Dravaki insisted on being noticed. It is always like this with humans. Is it not? When they finally notice you, it is too late, because by then you are already woven into their mess like a moth that stumbles into a torch unaware that its fragile wings are seconds from crisping. What is Tootle? Makes this tale worth remembering, however, is not merely that aliens demanded war and humans responded, but that one human diplomat, whose name will become both legend and scandal, chose silence as his weapon and silence as his battlefield, which confused the Dravaki more than any fleet could have. Because the Dravaki were a species whose entire sense of power was measured by the volume of their voices and the sharpness of their threats, and so when their king stood in his shimmering golden armor to declare the righteous extermination of Earth, he did not expect that his audience of human diplomats would include one who neither bowed nor argued nor raised a trembling voice, but simply sat with his strange human stillness like a predator, biding time. For a moment the chamber wavered, caught between noise and silence, between the ancient customs of intimidation and this new incomprehensible void where words had no grip. And in that hesitation history found its doorway, because humans thrive in hesitation and doubt. In the very cracks where certainty falters, one must understand that the Dravaki king was not a subtle creature. He was tall, with scales polished by servants, and a mouth full of tusks sharpened on ceremonial stones. He measured authority by the echo of his roar, and the number of courtiers who fainted when he entered a room. He believed silence to be weakness, ignorance, or worse, fear. So when the human diplomat remained motionless, he mistook it for surrender, which is the kind of mistake that has doomed empires since the dawn of stars. The king raised his staff, preparing to declare war officially, as though a declaration makes war more real than the blood itself. And that is when the human moved, not with noise, not with pomp, but with a small, simple gesture that has since been studied by alien academies across a dozen systems, dissected in essays, analyzed in military colleges, and whispered about in galactic bars where mercenaries laugh too loudly at stories they half believe. The gesture was a quiet step forward, a bow of the head, a moment where the air seemed to hold its breath, and then the king slumped lifeless onto his throne, eyes, glassy staff slipping from clawed hands as the silence deepened. The execution was silent, not a drop of blood, not a single cry, no weapon revealed, no scream from the guards, just a sudden rearrangement of life and death, life and death, as though the universe itself had pressed mute. What weapon did he use? Scholars debate. Some claim nanotechnology. Others whisper of psychic art. Some insist it was merely poison slipped earlier during the ceremonial feast. But the truth is, humans rarely reveal their methods until long after they have already won, and often not even then, because they seem to take pleasure in leaving their enemies puzzled, terrified, and endlessly speculating. As the Dravaki court erupted into panic, confusion, and disbelief, the human diplomat remained perfectly calm, eyes reflecting that unsettling mix of sorrow and amusement humans display when they are both sorry for the mess and secretly delighted that their gamble worked. The aliens demanded war. But now, with their king executed in silence by the very creature they thought weak, they were left in a paradox. How could they declare war against a species that demonstrated victory without lifting a fleet, without firing a shot, without even speaking a word? If silence could kill a king, What then could noise accomplish? The galaxy watched this event with the kind of fascinated horror that humans inspire so effortlessly, and one cannot help but admire the dark irony that the loudest demand for war was ended. Not by louder threats, but by silence itself. Yet that is humanity for you. They carry storms in whispers, they draw daggers in the folds of peace, they smile while rearranging the balance of entire civilizations. The Dravaki had wanted fire. They received shadow. They had wanted a spectacle. They received stillness. And in that stillness, the seed of something far larger began to grow, because silence began to grow, because silence does not end with a body on a throne. It echoes, it multiplies, it unsettles until it shifts empires entirely. And this is the story of how one quiet execution rattled the stars more than 1,000 wars could have ever dreamed to do. The silence in the chamber stretched long enough for the courtiers to feel its weight crushing down on their scaled backs, and even the air filters in the high dome of the throne room seemed to hesitate in their hum, as though the machinery itself was waiting for permission to continue. And this is, worth pausing to appreciate, because in alien societies, especially those built on constant noise, the absence of sound is not neutral. It is terror, it is accusation, it is the invisible predator circling in the dark, yet humans who grew up with silence as a tool and a refuge, who mastered the art of Vujudfi. Pausing before answering a question, who learned that quiet was sometimes the most dangerous noise of all, they could wield it like a blade. And that was what this particular diplomat did. He did not gloat. He did not explain. He did not raise his hands in triumph. He simply stood there as though nothing unusual had happened, while the Dravaki stumbled in disbelief. And if you were wondering why the guards did not attack him, or why the advisors did not seize him, one must understand the paralysis that comes from a worldview shattered in real time. Imagine building your entire empire on the belief that your empire on the belief loudness is power, that dominance is measured in the size of your roar, then watching your king, the loudest of all, collapse without so much as a sound. And you might begin to see why their claws twitched but did not strike. Their brains were busy rebooting centuries of cultural certainty, and in that gap, the human remained untouchable. And you see, this is the pattern of humanity. They are weakest when predictable, but unbearable when they decide to act outside the script. Everyone in that chamber had a role, and they expected the human to play his lines with trembling apologies or frantic pleas. But Ateo. Instead, he tossed the script into the fire and improvised a gesture that made the entire play meaningless. This is the unsettling magic of humans. They are improvisers on the stage of history, which is precisely why no empire that has faced them has ever truly understood them. For to understand a human is to predict them, and to predict them is impossible, since they barely predict themselves. The news of the king's sudden execution spread through the Dravaki dominion faster than the speed of thought, which is saying something, because their communication networks had long been considered the fastest trade. In this sector of the galaxy, whole planets froze in disbelief. Courtiers on distant moons shrieked their confusion. Military admirals demanded explanations. Priests declared omens, and scribes began rewriting the chronicles before the body was even cold. And at the heart of this storm was one human, Diplomat, who carried silence like a weapon and refused to explain, which of course made the aliens even more frantic, because the absence of explanation is far worse than a confession. When you are trying to rebuild certainty, the Dominion expected retaliation. They expected fleets of Earth warships to endeath warships arrive. They expected fiery ultimatums, and in their panic they began preparing for a war that never came, because Earth had no interest in war with them. Earth did not even know their borders with much precision, and most humans back home were more concerned with breakfast, cereal, and political gossip than alien demands. Yet somehow, one quiet act in one chamber had shifted the balance of galactic fear against the Dravaki and toward the humans, without the humans even noticing at first. This is another dangerous truth about humanity. They win battles they did not even mean to fight. Their strength is not only an intent but an accident, in stumbling into victories through sheer audacity or ignorance, or both. They leave their enemies defeated not by calculated campaigns, but by chaotic brilliance that looks like madness until it works, and the Dravaki realized this too late. They began spreading stories of the silent execution, painting the human as an assassin, a sorcerer, a demon wearing fragile flesh, but every story carried With it the same confession that silence itself was stronger than their loudest roar, and the more they tried to discredit him, the more powerful the myth became. In taverns across the Dominion, whispers began to spread that perhaps the king had not been killed at all, but had simply chosen to stop. Living in the presence of such a terrifying stillness that life itself retreated from his body. Absurd, yes, but myths thrive on absurdity, and humans are masters of birthing myths in the minds of their enemies. Without even lifting a finger, the surviving courtiers attempted to elect a new king, but the candidates trembled each time they opened their mouths, because how can you roar when silence itself might kill you? And so debates ended in mutters, parades ended in whispers, and sermons turned into hushed prayers. The Dominion, a civilization built on sound, was suddenly haunted by its absence. There is haunted by its absence. Entire cultural engines sputtering, because one human had demonstrated that silence could be sharper than noise. And this collapse would ripple far beyond the throne room into every corner of their empire. The Diplomat, meanwhile, was escorted out of the chamber unharmed. Not because they respected him, but because they feared him, and as he walked through the jeweled corridors lined with guards who dared not breathe too loudly, he was already calculating the next step in this performance. For make no mistake, silence is never random with humans. It is often strategic, and when deployed well, it leaves room for speculation to do the rest of the work. He knew the Dravaki would invent 1,000 explanations, and each one would serve humanity better than anything he could say himself. Oh, he kept quiet even during his return voyage home, smiling at the thought of empires collapsing under the weight of their own imagination. This smile is another unsettling feature of humans, one that has made alien anthropologists write entire grim treatises on the matter, because it is a smile that can mean sorrow, joy, threat, or all three at once, and the inability to decode it has toppled negotiations far more than words, aces, far more than words ever did. And so the story of this diplomat spread not just through the Dominion, but through neighboring empires who now asked themselves a question they had never asked before. If one silent human could end a king, what could an entire planet of them do? This question is more dangerous than any weapon, for it infects the mind, and once planted it gnaws and grows like an unchecked weed. The answer, of course, is unpredictable, for humanity rarely acts with one mind. But the fear was enough, and in galactic politics, fear is a form of gravity. It bends everything around it. The Draki, who once demanded war, now demanded explanations from their own priests, their own generals, their own histories, which could not give them comfort, and the Diplomat returned to Earth as both a hero and a pariah, for humanity itself did not know what to do with him. Some considered him dangerous. Some considered him brilliant. Most did not care, for he was simply one among billions, and that is perhaps the strangest irony of all, that the act which shook the galaxy barely registered at home. For humans have a way of stumbling into the extraordinary while arguing about the ordinary, and this casual disregard for their own significance is what makes them so terrifying to others. The Diplomat returned to Earth as both a hero and a pariah, and while most humans remained busy with their breakfast and gossip, as mentioned earlier, the galactic stage was already trembling under the weight of silence that had killed a king. And you might think this would be the end of the story, that it immersed. The Dravaki Dominion would slink back into its noise-filled corridors and lick its wounds. But history is never so tidy, especially not when humans are involved, because the ripple of one event in their hands becomes a storm across worlds. The Dravaki did not collapse immediately. No empires fall. Quickly, though, their priests muttered in hushed tones, and their generals avoided speaking too loudly in strategy halls. They still possessed fleets, armies, and centuries of habit, and habit is a stubborn tyrant to overthrow. So while silence haunted them, war still loomed, only it was war redefined, shaped not by their roaring proclamations, but by the unbearable question of what humans might do next. And this question is why the Dravaki Council demanded revenge. It could not decide how, for every strategy was poisoned by speculation. If they sent an assassin, would silence stop his heart? If they sent fleets, would silence cause the ships to turn back? If they shouted their loudest threats, would silence mock them into madness? This paralysis spread like rot through their hierarchy. Yet rot breeds, strange flowers, and in the darkest corners of their dominion, a faction began to grow, one that saw the Aeon to grow, one that saw the silent execution not as humiliation but as revelation. They reasoned that if silence could unmake a king, then perhaps silence should be studied, perhaps silence should be worshipped. And so a cult of silence formed in the underlevels of Dravaki cities, where adherents gathered in chambers, stripped of eons, gathered in chambers stripped of echo chambers where they dared not speak, where they mimicked the stillness of the human diplomat, as though by imitation they could inherit his power. Imagine their society built on noise now discovering stillness like a forbidden drug, and you may begin to see why their empire cracked from within. Faster than any human fleet could have managed. Meanwhile, the human diplomat, whose name we shall not reveal, because names are fragile anchors, and this story is not about the comfort of anchors, but the chaos of tides. He continued his work on Earth, shuttled between councils, interrogated by committees. Praised and condemned in equal measure, some accused him of assassination, others of brilliance, some whispered he had made a deal with alien gods. But he explained nothing, for explanation would have ended the myth, and humans understand better than anyone that myths are currency, more powerful than aim, more powerful than weapons. Yet while Earth bickered about his morality, the galaxy shifted. The neighboring empires that had once dismissed humans as loud mammals with poor impulse control now began reevaluating their assessments. If one human could kill silently, what could 1,000 do on a battlefield? If silence itself was their tool, what other horrors waited unspoken? This reevaluation turned into policy. Ambassadors who once ignored Earth suddenly sent envoys. Treaties long delayed were signed, and military alliances once mocked were offered, and all because one alien king had died in a chamber where no one could hear the strike. This is how history moves, not in grand speeches or recorded declarations, but in whispers that unsettle the mind until it chooses a new path. Humans did not plan this, but they benefited all the same, though as always they argued among themselves about whether to embrace the power or the power or fear it. And this internal chaos only deepened the galactic fear, because how do you deal with a species that cannot even agree with itself, yet still topples kings? The Dravaki, meanwhile, fractured further. Their admirals staged coups, their priests denounced each other, their cult of silence grew bolder, whispering that the humans were chosen by the void itself, and soon enough small rebellions lit up across their colonies. Some sought vengeance against humanity, while others sought to emulate it, the contradiction tearing them apart like fabric stretched in too many directions. The irony, of course, is that humans barely noticed any of this. They were too busy with their elections, their scandals, their endless chatter to care. That entire empires were trembling in their shadow. And this is perhaps the most dangerous quality of all. They do not need to try to be terrifying. They simply exist, and others do the work of fearing them. The diplomat knew this. He watched reports from afar, smiling that same inscrutable smile, while the committees argued, and the newspaper speculated. He knew that silence was still working, doing its invisible labor, long after the king had fallen, and he began to wonder if silence could reshape not just one empire, but the galaxy itself. He asked himself what would happen if humanity leaned into the if they deliberately wielded silence as a doctrine rather than an accident. And though he said nothing of this aloud, the thought was enough to shiver through the councils of power like a draft under a locked door. For even within humanity, there were those who saw the opportunity. Generals who had just whispered about psychological warfare, ministers who dreamed of deterrence through mystery corporations, who considered selling silence as a weapon. All of this ferment from one quiet moment in one chamber on one alien world. And so the galaxy spun faster under the weight of fear, hope, myth, and misunderstanding. The Dravaki dominion would not last long in this storm, but its collapse would not be clean, and in the collapse new powers would rise, for history does not tolerate vacuums. It fills them with whatever madness is closest, and humanity was very close indeed. The diplomat could see it. Unfolding, though no one else seemed to grasp it. The age of loud empires was ending. The age of silent humans was dawning, and whether humanity liked it or not, the galaxy was listening to a new kind of noise, the kind that hides in silence and echoes forever. The age of loud empires was ending. The age of silent humans was dawning, and whether humanity liked it or not, the galaxy was listening to a new kind of noise, the kind that hides in silence and echoes forever. But endings never arrive without resistance, and the Dravaki dominion, though fractured, was not yet finished, because an empire does not collapse with one dead king. It collapses with 1,000 choices made badly in sequence, and the Dravaki had centuries of bad habits to draw from. So when the first cracks became unignorable, their admirals did what admirals always do. They built fleets they painted them with new colors, declaring that the silence of the human would be drowned in the thunder of war drums. They assembled armadas in orbit and rehearsed their roars before mirrors as if volume could disguise fear, and to their credit, these fleets were impressive, gleaming with crystalline armor. Powered by fusion drives that made lesser civilizations shudder, yet every admiral hesitated at the same point in their planning. They asked the question, if silence could kill a king, what might it do to a fleet? And hesitation corrodes more thoroughly than enemy fire still. One admiral, bolder, or perhaps stinted incendio, more desperate than the rest, decided that speculation was itself a disease, and that only by striking humanity first could the Dominion prove silence held no power. So he assembled his loyalists and declared a holy campaign against Earth. But here, the irony ripened to perfection, because the human Anamonita Diplomat already suspected such a move, and rather than argue for defense, rather than beg Earth to prepare fleets, he once again did the unthinkable. He advised stillness, do nothing. He told them, let the Dravaki exhaust themselves, let them discover what war against humans truly means, and though committees raged and generals fumed, his advice was heeded partly because humanity was too busy bickering to form a coherent plan, and partly because even among humans myths are powerful motivators, and many had begun to believe their own myth of silence as shield and sword. So when the Dravaki fleet departed its homeworld's vast and terrible, bristling with weapons, it sailed into a galaxy already poisoned against them. Other empires watched with fascination, but none offered support for YLI with a species that might collapse from whispers alone. Their fleet traveled weeks, then months, growing restless in the void because war thrives on momentum and silence eats momentum alive. The crews began to whisper about the Diplomat. Some swore they heard his quiet breath in the static of the comm channels. Others swore his shadow appeared in the corridors, though he was light years away. Paranoid, fermented discipline, decayed officers barked louder and louder, trying to prove command. Frequency overlapping, colliding, creating a chaos of electromagnetic chatter, so dense that it became a shield far more impenetrable than any energy field. Human engineers had not designed it this way. It was simply the byproduct of their compulsive need to shout at each other across every possible medium, but to the Dravaki it looked like sorcery, their systems confused, overwhelmed, drowning in human noise. They tried again, recalibrating, but the chatter only grew worse because humans were watching the invasion, live streaming it, making jokes, speculating on the alien fleet's poor aim, entire comedy. Shows sprouted overnight, mocking the invaders until their soldiers began to see themselves as caricatures on human screens. This is a weapon unique to Earth, humiliation broadcast in real time, and it cracked the morale of the invaders faster than any missile could. Within weeks, the great fleet that had Nianzanan set out to destroy humanity was a ghost ship drifting in confusion. Crews deserting mutinies, breaking out some vessels, even surrendering not to human militaries, but to human television, networks begging for asylum, in exchange for not being mocked on late-night comedy shows, and thus the war ended. Before it began, drowned, not in silence this time, but in noise, the kind of noise only humans could generate, chaotic, relentless, ridiculous noise that no algorithm could filter, and no alien brain could endure. The Diplomat observed all this with that same quiet smile, realizing that humanity had just at Ekri revealed its second weapon. If silence could kill kings, noise could kill armies, and the galaxy trembled anew. For now they asked themselves which was worse, the silence that ended life without warning, or the noise that dismantled fleets without firing a shot. And once again humanity had proven terrifying without even trying. The galaxy trembled anew. For now they asked themselves which was worse, the silence that ended life without warning, or the noise that dismantled fleets without firing a shot. And once again, humanity had proven terrifying without even trying. But endings are never clean in galactic history, and what's true followed was not a simple surrender, not a treaty signed neatly at the edge of a battlefield, but something far stranger, something only humanity could inspire. Because the Dravaki Dominion had collapsed in every way that mattered, their king executed their fleets, humiliated their culture, infected by a culture infected by silence and noise alike, but collapse breeds contagion and neighboring empires began to fracture under the same pressure. They asked themselves, if we roar, are we inviting silence? If we prepare fleets, are we inviting mockery? If we act at all, are we walking into a human trap? And in this hesitation, entire systems wavered, alliances broke, merchants refused to travel in fear of becoming the next punchline, priests warned their congregations that laughter itself was a sign of human infiltration. And into this growing paranoia, humanity did nothing, or rather humanity did what it always does. They moved to. They bickered and traded and streamed and laughed. They argued about politics while galactic empires wrote trembling reports about their threat. They held concerts while alien admirals studied the weaponized frequencies of rock bands. They built amusement parks while priests declared roller coasters. Sacrilegious machines designed to bend the laws of gravity itself, and in this absurd contrast, humanity became the most feared species in the known galaxy without ever announcing it or planning it. The diplomat who had started it all knew this would be the outcome, though he never claimed credit. Understood that fear once born cannot be killed, only redirected, and he watched as Earth became a kind of mythological center, not a military capital, not an economic hub, but a cultural black hole, into which all narratives fell, and from which they emerged, distorted, stronger, more terrifying than before. Aliens came to Earth in secret to study the humans. Some disguised themselves as tourists, others as scholars, still others as refugees, but all left with the same unsettled impression that these creatures did not follow rules of power as written in any galactic manual. They carried storms and whispers. They shattered fleets with comedy shows. They lived as though consequence were a negotiable suggestion, and yet somehow they endured and triumphed. The Dravaki cult of silence spread into other empires, mutating into movements where alien citizens began gathering in quiet rooms, imitating the human diplomat stillness, believing that if they mastered silence, they too could wield invisible power. Others imitated human noise, streaming human broadcasts into their own homes until their leaders banned them. But bans never last, and black markets for human laughter became more valuable than weapons. Entire generations of aliens grew up more familiar with Earth comedians than with their own philosophers, more fluent in human sarcasm than in their ancestral chants. And this cultural invasion achieved what no fleet could: total infiltration by accident. Humanity had become the galaxy's most dangerous contagion, and the most ironic part was that they still argued over whether pineapple belonged on pizza, and whether their leaders were intelligent or fools, while outside their planet entire civilizations studied their every word as though decoding scripture. This is the dark comedy. Abyss is the dark comedy. History that humanity changes galaxies not by deliberate conquest, but by being itself messy, contradictory, hilarious, terrifying itself. The diplomat eventually faded into obscurity, for that is the fate of catalysts. The myth remains while the man disappears, but his silence lingered like a phantom in Nin. And every court and every council and every whisper of rebellion, aliens still debated how exactly he had executed the king. Was it poison? Was it psychic force? Was it technology? Was it simply the weight of human audacity? No one ever agreed, but the disagreement itself was the point. For so long as no answer existed, every possibility haunted them. Meanwhile, Earth continued its noisy, chaotic march forward, inventing new technologies without considering their consequences, creating new media without predicting its reach, stumbling into galactic dominance without even realizing it. The galaxy had demanded war, and in response, humanity had offered silence and noise, and both proved fatal, more fatal than any fleet or weapon. And as the dust settled, they demanded war, and in its beginning responded. Final lesson crystallized in the minds of alien scholars who dared to write it down, though few would speak it aloud, that the true danger of humanity was not their weapons or their numbers or their cunning, but their unpredictability. They kill kings with silence. They dismantle fleets with laughter. Tomorrow they might do something stranger still, and in that uncertainty lies a terror greater than any war. Ending a story like this may feel unsatisfying to those who want neat resolutions, but history rarely offers such gifts. It lingers, it echoes, it mutates, and so does humanity, which is why galaxy still watches them with equal parts awe and fear, waiting for the next absurd accident that will change everything again, because the humans are here and the universe will never be predictable again.